Welcome to the AFR Saints channel, where we provide you daily content on your favorite team, the New Orleans Saints. Do us a favor and hit that subscribe button. Be sure to leave your comments below and smash that like button. Who dat?
We know it's going to be a pivotal year, obviously, for the team, for the franchise in 2024. Matthew Parrish, NOLA.com, wrote an interesting piece today over there about Saints on the hot seat when he looked at front office, coaches, players. Which players, front office, coaches have the most at stake heading into 2024? There's some obvious ones, but there's some ones in there that I also saw that I'm like, I never really thought of it that way. So Matthew Parrish joins us now to talk about that piece. He's on Twitter at Matthew_Parrish, P-A-R-A-S. Matthew, we appreciate the time. How are you?
Hey, I'm doing well. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So, all right, a few of them fascinated me, and I want to get to those, but I feel like we have to obviously start where you started with the obvious and Dennis Allen. I want to frame it this way for you, though. Is there a scenario that you see short of making the playoffs that allows Dennis Allen to return in 2025?
Yeah, I mean, if Derek Carr gets hurt and like a bunch of starters get hurt, I mean, maybe that's the situation, right? That you could imagine that happening. Or say, like, let's say Derek Carr gets hurt in the beginning of the season, misses the first 8 weeks, they're 1-7, then Carr returns, they finish the year hot, and Dennis Allen could maybe point to that and say, see, if we had Carr the whole year, or if we had our pieces in place, we would have been a playoff team. Like it's those sorts of situations that maybe they give him, maybe they're lenient that way. It just depends. But I mean, the facts are that you haven't made the playoffs. His first 2 years, 3 years total. The pressure's on. It's going to be it's setting up to be a do or die season.
You had Derek Carr on there as well, which makes sense. I mean, the head coach and the quarterback are going to be tied together, especially Dennis Allen and Derek Carr. I mean, from their time with the Raiders to now in New Orleans. The contract's always the interesting thing with Carr, especially after the restructure. We know the Saints, I mean, they don't care about a salary cap. They'll do whatever they have to do. What have you given any thought to what it would look like for them to potentially off-ramp after a 2024 season if they wanted to?
Yeah, so the thing I'm still trying to figure out is there are a bunch of other contracts in place that would affect just how much of a hole they would be in, or what their salary cap would look like. Depending on what happens with Ryan Ramczyk if he has to retire, or just other sorts of things. What happens to Kamara's dead money? But the way that the Saints, I think, feel about it is that if they absolutely had to, they could get out from it. They restructured last year, his contract last year. The contract was actually designed to be restructured just to get some wiggle room for this past off season. So it is more costly now after restructuring it, but it's not impossible. And so I think if they were forced to do it, if they felt like they were forced to do it, that they could. But it's also not the most palatable thing in the world either.
What do you think would happen to a guy like Clint Kubiak in a situation like this?
Yeah, I left him off that list partly because I wrote about the most important Saints for 2024, and I didn't want to repeat myself, one for one for those. But I put him, I think he's kind of behind Derek Carr, the second most important Saint, just because Dennis Allen is basically trusting his job for Clint Kubiak to turn this offense around. And as for what happens to him, it's an interesting parallel. I used to cover the Washington Commanders, and my last season there, Ron Rivera hired Eric Bieniemy, kind of the same thing. All right, let's see if this guy can really save our situation. And it didn't go the way that Rivera or the Commanders wanted, and that staff, was cleared out of the building, and now Bieniemy's at UCLA. So it didn't have the desired impact, and maybe something like that could happen to Clint Kubiak. But at the same time, if, let's say, they show enough offensive prowess and they still feel like they need to make a head coaching change at the end of the season, maybe the next coach would keep him on. You know, that has happened in the NFL before, but all that is to say is it's pretty speculative and obviously too early to tell. But those are just, to answer your question, maybe a few scenarios that could or couldn't happen.
So that's part of the interesting thing too with Allen, because I mean, the way we started it when we were talking about, okay, what if there's injuries or whatnot? What if it's kind of like last year, but they just lose out? Like, I mean, like if they do show offensive improvement, but it's just not enough to get over the hump, they go 9-8 again and they miss out. I mean, is that it? Would you think that would be enough, or would they actually be like, you know what? No, it's time for a change, even though you could see it trending in the right direction? I mean, I guess there's a lot that could cloud up the decision.
Yeah, and it's hard too, right? Because the Saints are generally, I think, a pretty patient franchise. They're aggressive with the way that they handle the salary cap, but they weren't going to fire Dennis Allen after last season, for instance. That they were going to give him time to grow and develop. Now, I will say that I think the fan base probably does have it does factor into it if there's a general apathy out there toward Dennis Allen, or if season tickets aren't the way that if the season ticket holders kind of don't renew it and there's pressure on the business side, maybe that factors into the equation. I don't think they would say that, but you never know with how teams operate. So I do think there are a lot of factors at play, but if you're the Saints and you have a similar situation as last season, you kind of just have to generally ask yourself, like, is this worth repeating over and over? And I think that is, if you're a Saints fan, the frustrating thing about the Dennis Allen era so far is that there's been a lot of the same problems. They haven't really had a lot of solutions until it's been too late in the season. And so, is it worth doing the same thing over and over again?
You also mentioned the 2017 draft class, and I know you and your colleague Jeff Duncan have written about this, at least what's left of the 2017 draft class, famed draft class for the New Orleans Saints. Alvin Kamara, Marshawn Lattimore, Ryan Ramczyk, they're all on the list. Of the 2017 draft class, which of those guys do you think is most likely to return with the New Orleans Saints potentially for 2025?
I think Lattimore, in terms of if he can reestablish himself as a top-tier corner in the NFL, he's still young enough. Like with Kamara, it's kind of hard to, he's 28, he'll be 29. Even if they rework his contract, there's a entire possibility that he could return for 2025. But, as it stands now, if they don't rework his contract, then they're pretty much it's pretty much set up to where they would part ways at the end of the season. I think either of those guys could play themselves back into the Saints' future, but I think Lattimore, just because it's a lot harder to find a top-tier cornerback or best in the league type of cornerback than it is, I think, a running back.
So the one that surprised me, and we're talking to Matthew Parrish, NOLA.com, on Twitter at Matthew_Parrish. The one that surprised me was Pete Werner. I wasn't really expecting to see Pete Werner on this list. He's had a pretty solid career so far in New Orleans. I guess kind of figured he's been a starting linebacker for you, that they'd kind of keep rolling it. What led you to put Pete Werner on the list?
Yeah, it was another one where I've written a lot about Trevor Penning, so I tried to not just do the same answers over and over. But I do think Pete Werner actually has like a legitimate case to be on this list, and I'll make it. The Saints challenged him basically this offseason, said, all right, we weren't really happy with your third season. Your numbers seemed fine on paper, but they were a little bit worse. He didn't make the jump that people quite expected. They brought in Willie Gay, who, could be looked at as a one-for-one replacement for Zach Bond, but Willie Gay has been a lot more productive and has Super Bowl experience and was a starter with Kansas City. I think Willie Gay goes and helps them kind of fill their weakness in terms of, or maybe he can better stop mobile quarterbacks. Maybe he can be a faster option than Pete Werner. And then they also brought in Khalid Hudson. So they're really kind of challenging him to take this step forward, to earn his starting spot. And, he's also a free agent after this season. So it's a really big season for him because, he also, Zach Bond got paid this offseason, Caden Ellis the last offseason. Like, the Saints have had kind of their linebackers play well enough to get these paydays, and, how is this next season going to unfold for him. I just kind of think it's a really interesting situation that Bears monitoring.
You've mentioned a couple, Penning, Kubiak in a sense. Is there anybody else that you left off that you thought could have been on this list?
I mentioned Trevor Penning, but I mean that's
Yeah.
the big one. Is if you can't prove yourself you can play by the third year in the NFL. I mean, what's your future like in this league? It's a big year for him, and it's a big year. It's not only a big year for him personally, but the Saints are pretty much putting their eggs in Trevor Penning's basket. I mean, they have backup options at right tackle if he doesn't work out, but they're really showing him. They're giving him a vote of confidence right now. So we'll see how that situation unfolds. But yeah, he would be another one that I would have put on the list. But I threw in Mickey Loomis at the end there just to mention him, so I didn't get reader complaints and saying, "What about the GM?"
Oh yeah, well that's where we were going next. What about the GM? Boy, oh boy, he got turned up on Mickey a little bit last season. A couple interesting media availabilities mixed in between there as well. Some interesting comments, and look, it hasn't been great from a personnel standpoint. Everyone knows how ingrained Mickey is into that organization, though. I mean, he's been part of it since 2000. Like he's seen the worst of it, like the lowest lows, the highest highs, and everything else in between. Is there any scenario you would see where Mickey Loomis doesn't get to go out on his own terms?
I mean, they would really have to bottom out, right? I mean, they'd have to be the worst team in the league. They'd have to, nothing. I mean, I understand that last season didn't go the way that the Saints wanted, that, there was some rumors of whether he would step aside to give, Kai Harley and, or maybe Jeff Ireland a shot. But it's just he was pretty adamant that that's not going to happen. He still seems pretty adamant that he has plenty left to give. And, I think the Benson family, they trust Mickey Loomis to run this. And Mickey Loomis was named in Tom Benson's will as a potential co-executor in case Dennis Lauscher couldn't perform the duties. So I don't think they're picturing, Mickey Loomis going anywhere anytime soon. So things would just have to get so bad. You would need some, I don't know, Dan Snyder stuff, to plague the franchise and have it be all sorts of negative, stuff that doesn't really seem entirely realistic right now. I'd be very surprised if, even if they go 5-12, I don't think he'd really be in danger of losing his job.
Oh Lord, yeah, they don't need that. We don't need the Dan Snyder stuff. Coming. I mean, look, the history of this state. I mean, anything's possible. But yeah, well, okay, we'll see with Mickey. It's definitely I want to say the honeymoon ended, because the honeymoon ended a while ago, obviously from Super Bowl and whatnot. But last season, it kind of felt like, for the first time, it was like, oh, this is what it feels like again for it to be 2003. But we'll see with Mickey Loomis. Matthew Paris, NOLA.com, on Twitter at Matthew_Paris, Paris Paras. We appreciate the time as always, man. Thank you.
Yeah, appreciate it. Thanks.
Absolutely. New Orleans Saints, they continue through their offseason. Get set to report to training camp here shortly out in Irvine, California.
Hey, thanks so much for watching. Please leave your comments. I love to interact, and be sure to hit the red subscribe button below.